I'm Jan Mutchler from UMass Boston, and I'm pleased to be talking with you about the true cost of aging and the Elder Index. I'd like to start by reflecting on what we really mean by financial security. When we talk about financial security in later life, we're really talking about having the resources that are adequate to cover the daily expenses that let us stay safe and independent in our homes. And for most of us, our resources in later life do include Social Security benefits. For some of us, they might also include savings, a pension, maybe some other financial resources. But when we're talking about financial security, we need to consider not just the sources of income that we have in retirement, but also what it actually costs for housing and medical care and other essentials. At the University of Massachusetts, Boston, we've been producing the Elder Index to summarize those costs for older adults. And we've been doing this for more than a decade. The Elder Index describes what it costs to safeguard an adequate lifestyle and to preserve our independence. We build the Elder Index based on a bare bones budget, including nothing beyond the essential expenses that people age 65 and older encounter every day. And we calculate the Elder Index county by county. So it captures the cost of living differences that we all know exist across communities. I'm showing here just a screenshot of our website through which the Elder Index data are available at no cost. We provide the data for every county, every state and metropolitan area in the US. So if you go to elderindex.org and start looking around, you can see the data. The data can be viewed and retrieved by clicking on Explore the Index. And from there, you can choose up to 4 locations at a time. And those locations could be counties or states or metropolitan areas. You can select filters for whether you're talking about a single person or a couple living independently, what kind of housing they have, and their health status. And then if you click Apply, you'll see charts and tables, and those can be downloaded. This figure just shows the Elder Index for the 2022 for the national average. And this shows that an older person living alone needs between $24,000 and $36,000 to get by. Older couples need between $36,000 and $49,000 a year. These figures are based on tabulating the monthly expenses for housing and food, transportation, and healthcare, and then adding just a little bit more for miscellaneous other expenses. We sum those up to reflect the annual bare bones Elder Index budget. The national average values that are shown here are population weighted averages across the counties throughout the US. These values show that the cost of housing is a very big part of the financial insecurity story. For singles, housing is the largest component of the Elder Index across scenarios. And for couples, housing is also a very big component as well. But we should note that for the national average Elder Index, the cost of healthcare for a couple is actually higher than the cost of housing if a person is a homeowner without a mortgage. Now, the exact balance between housing and healthcare in terms of costs, that's going to differ across locations, but everywhere housing is a very large share of the true cost of aging. The differences in cost of living across locations have the potential to impact retirement security in a substantial way. To give you just a glimpse of these differences, we can compare state level values of the Elder Index as we see here. The New York State average Elder Index is just over $35,000, and that compares to the Ohio average, which is just under $25,000. So just across those two states, you see a gap of more than $10,000 a year. Now, all of these values are based on the same scenario. In all cases, we're assuming a single renter in good health. And so the only difference, the difference that you see here is the cost of living in these locations. And you can see very clearly that the biggest single impact on those differences across locations is the cost of housing. So in the states shown here and in every state throughout the country and every county throughout the whole US, housing costs are a substantial expense. But healthcare costs are right behind. And everywhere, the more people need to pay for housing, the less they have available to cover medical expenses and their food and other essentials. Before we leave this figure, I just want to highlight where the poverty line fits into this story. A lot of our conversations about financial well-being in later life focuses on what we learn from federal measures of poverty. But when we describe financial insecurity by talking just about the federal poverty rate, we get an inaccurate understanding of the scale of financial struggle that older Americans actually experience. In every state and every county across the United States, the federal poverty threshold is a lot lower than the elder index. We can measure the scale and the scope of financial insecurity by comparing the costs of getting by based on the elder index to the income that people actually have. For these same 5 states that we looked at just a minute ago, we find that the federal poverty rate among older singles who live alone range from 14% in Colorado and in Virginia to 19% in New York State. And again, remember that the threshold used to flag poverty status is the same across 5 states and virtually all states throughout the country. But these figures are dwarfed when we consider people living below the elder index. In New York State, we find that an additional 38% of older singles have income between the federal poverty line and the elder index. And that results in a total of 57% having incomes below what is needed to cover essential expenses based on New York costs. And the share of people with incomes in the gap is somewhat lower in the other states that we're showing here. But all across America, we see very large shares of singles living on incomes that don't support financial security. And here we see rates of financial insecurity when you add up the people below the federal poverty line and people in the gap that range from 46% in Colorado, we see 44% in Virginia, 49% in Georgia, and 41% in Ohio. And in fact, in every state throughout the nation, when we factor in the people who are in the gap, we come to understand that far more older adults and families are living in a very precarious financial situation than what we commonly recognize. Just a couple more points about differences in financial security based on the elder index, and one is about gender. We see that single women are at especially high risk of financial insecurity. In fact, half of older single women have incomes below the elder index, along with 42% of single men. And this compares to 21% of couples. So I think it's worth pointing out that even among couples who typically have more sources of income, more amounts of income, and who benefit from economies of scale within households, 1 out of 5 of those are financially insecure. And when we put numbers on all of the people that fall into these 3 categories, altogether the figures tell us that 11 million older people living in 1- or 2-person households have incomes that fall below the true cost of aging. And people of color also experience especially high risk of financial insecurity. Older adults who are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or Native American have considerably higher rates of financial insecurity than their white counterparts. For example, 43% of singles who are white and not a Latino have incomes below the elder index, but that compares to 67% of their Latinx counterparts. Between 57% and 61% of Native American, Asian, and Black singles also have incomes below the elder index. And in all cases, these are far higher than the rates for white singles. I hope you'll visit our Elder Index website to retrieve data for any county, state, or metro area in the country. You can learn more about our work by going to our websites or reaching out directly to me. And I will just also thank our funders and partners who support our work on the true cost of aging.